Yes, in talking about Josephus Daniels, you can choose to make a recommendation as the committee, or we talked about it briefly before Tanya left. You could, because this is a unique circumstance, decide just to bring it to the larger commission and have the conversation there. We do believe that this is a situation that will become political because of, you know, Josephus Daniel, who he was and the things that he did. It's a hard conversation either way.
I'd be interested if we could rename the house or amend the original report to include some that we denounce Daniels's white supremacist activities, and maybe if we could find a I don't know, a prominent Black citizen who was related to the property, or do you have to name a historic landmark after a person, or could we name it, I don't know, like the Raleigh Masonic Lodge House or something?
Right. So I think officially the property historically was Wakestone. That is its historic designation. It is, and I wouldn't say even now it's most known as the Josephus Daniels House. I think that the majority of Raleigh citizens know it as the Masonic Lodge. There, I believe, is room to add. None of the Mason history in the house is included in the landmark designation as it is. The Masons became involved in the property in the 50s. So, you know, they have half a century of history there that is not researched, is not documented. So, you know, their part of the story is significant as well. So that, you know, is a possibility. I would say the backstory recently on this property, over the last 10 years, the Masons have tried to sell the property, to have it, you know, adaptively reused, redeveloped, and have not had great success. We have met with many developers over the last even 5 years, looking for ways to make the property more profitable, more usable. In almost every instance, this has involved adding housing in the landscape areas. But none of these have really been successful. There have been a couple of more promising ones, but for reasons unbeknownst to us, they decided not to pursue the development. And so I think at this point in time, the property owners and I think the current developer that they're working with, they see no other alternative except to remove designation and move forward with some type of development, adaptive reuse that, you know, can keep the property.
Well, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
At least my brief experience with the committee and the panel is that we're about history. So, I mean, clearly he's a problem, and naming it for this person is the problem. But the historical relevance of the fact that that building exists is what we have to determine whether or not we want to preserve. And so I think that's the question on I think there's no question you don't want to name it. It could just be historically preserved as a building that represents a period of history in North Carolina, and call it something else and put up a plaque and talk about it. But losing it completely, that's the option we have. And I don't have an answer to that, but to me, that's the question that's on the table. Do we lose the history? And I feel like it's not like a statue to a slaveholder or a racist. This is history in a building, and our job is to determine whether or not we want to preserve history in the building. So I'd vote to get rid of the name because I'm not in favor of saluting any racists, but I think it's really important to talk about the history of the building and how do we preserve it. That's all I got to say.
I agree with you, Susan, about renaming it, and Katie. I think we should probably take this to the whole commission. I think that is probably a better idea.
I agree, and the applicant, Bill Price, is actually like a close family friend of mine, and I think he'd probably be interested in coming to speak more on it. I'd be interested in what he has to say. Yeah, I know he's been really involved in the Masonic goings-on for several decades, so I'm sure that he would, if we wanted to add some of that context to the report, if that's the direction we want to go. Of course, there are plenty of people in that organization who could provide us with that, and I think that could be one direction we might want to explore. If that doesn't, Colette, you said that there's no Masonic history mentioned currently.
Hey, Caleb. Right. As of right now, at the time of designation, which was pretty early, I believe, I don't have the documents right in front of me, the Masonic history was still fairly recent, and so none of that was included or considered relevant at the time. It was pretty much solely based on the previous family.
And Colette,
Okay.
there's also no designation based on the architectural significance, right?
Right.
Of the original house.
That none of so the entire early designation report is entirely based on Josephus Daniels, his accomplishments, his history. Something important to add that I did not, this property is one of 3 properties that we have in Raleigh that has been given statewide significance. What that means is that if a COA application were to be filed that included demolition of the property, the COA committee could deny it because it has been deemed to have significance for the entire state. Now, if the landmark designation is removed, the statewide significance will also be removed. And I think if your recommendation is to, expand the history of the landmark, rename it, it will also require amending the statewide significance because that, again, does not include any architectural history, any of the Masons' history, and I don't know how it would, how Josephus Daniels is seen for what he did now would reflect or impact the statewide significance that he was given, however many years ago. I don't think they would take it away, but it's probably a question that we should talk to with the State Historic Preservation Office.
So if it's...
Yeah. Do we have any idea how they're handling situations like this? I mean, this is coming up all over.
I'm not
and I mean, there's been no conversation to see what they're doing about. I mean, there should be some kind of guidelines maybe we can get from the state on how they're addressing, because this cannot be the only building that's falling into this kind of a category at this point.
Yeah, I definitely do not disagree, but they haven't officially made any kind of statement, or I haven't seen any emails recently on this topic, but I'm certain that it's a conversation that they have to be having. So talking to them would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably coming up with the Preservation North Carolina group too. They're probably having the same conversations.
I think
Okay,
what's
so we're
unique
gonna
about
take it-
this Sorry, Ian, go ahead. I was just going to say, I think what's unique about this conversation is not necessarily the number of properties that are named for a racist person in the state and the need to rename them, but the fact that we have a de-designation application on the table. So the party that owns the building is asking to remove that designation, not just rename it. And our discussion needs to be whether that's something, how we're going to recommend that city council move with this, kind of understanding that there may not be a lot of support to save the building when the applicant wants it gone, and because of the connotations and associations of the site for the public. So I think taking it to the whole commission, as Ian recommended, might be the right move for as public as this could become, but just to recenter the conversation on what are particular difficulties here.
I think as the research committee, can't we take it to the commission, but also take it with our comments that the research committee feels like this is still an architecturally significant structure, that we feel like the structure should be preserved, but we're completely in support of eliminating any accolades towards an individual who was not admirable in today's light, and say, you know, and maybe even, I don't know if it's our position or if it's the commission's position to come back with a kind of a compromise, like Susan was saying, rename it, and like Colette was saying, to rework the wording on both the local historic landmarks and on the state level for the other significance of the building with the architecture and with the masons. Can we take that to the commission and then just drop it in their lap?
I agree with you. I completely agree with you. I think this is their job and we need to give them the room to do it, but a recommendation is necessary. And if we're in agreement that we want to talk about preserving the history, but not the gentleman's legacy, it is history. I mean, racism is part of the history. How do you, this is the ultimate question. How do you preserve the history, but not honor or in any way look to the positive side of racism? Because I think there's been enough information on the damage. So this is a conversation for Raleigh to have. We have tons of that history here and we need to deal with it. And that's our job. So I think there's a statewide designation and they'll deal with it. But the state takes positions that Raleigh has to think about from our perspective. How do we preserve racism? And I think that's a conversation the Historic Society has to have, Historic District has to have. So I agree with you.
I agree as well. And I think we have a good opportunity here because we do have a report. So we do have documentation where we could put out, you know, exhibits of, like in the application here with some of those cartoons and things from the N&O, we could include those materials. And that's a great place to call out this person for a legacy of white supremacy and say, look how awful this was, which I think is unique to certain other, you know, the statues and things. I don't think those usually come with a report or as much context. So I think we have a lot of power to showcase that we don't support this. And on the flip side, look at why.
Okay, Susan, sorry, Ian.
Go ahead.
Susan had to drop off, but she said, she reiterated what she just said, that she agrees, taking it to the full commission, recommendation to consider preserving the history of the structure, not the name. And for later, she also added that she thought that Anne Robertson's house was amazing. and she believed that it represents Raleigh's history. So those were her parting comments.
So just a quick question. So if the house was renamed and we sort of rewrote the history, so to speak, of the house, would Daniels be completely eliminated from that report?
I don't think that would be wise. I mean,
I don't either.
despite who he is part of the history of the house.
Right. I think the best way to go about it is to sort of refocus the designation.
Yeah, I agree.
Off of him and onto something else. My wonder is that something else worthy of designation?
That is part of the larger question, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So we have a consensus, and we're going to move this to the commission and make a recommendation that it be renamed.
I vote aye. Yes.
Looks like we lost Katie. Does anyone else see Katie?
No.
Okay.
She's got that triangle on her.
Yeah.
She must have a bad connection.
Katie, are you back?
Yes, sorry about that. My internet decided to reboot, so we are back.
Okay, so I think we've come to an agreement here. Can we move on, or does anybody else have anything to say about Daniels? Okay. We move on to Ann Robertson's landmark application. I thought it was pretty convincing. It's a beautiful home with a really interesting history. Yeah, I'm in full favor of it becoming a landmark. Anyone else?
Since it's already in a historic district, I was kind of just wanted to open up discussion about what the particular additional significance is and what benefit we think that would add.
I think its long history is unique, being that it predates Oakwood. So I think that's one of the main things in my head that sort of make it stand out, and make it worthy of landmarking within the district. Anyone else?
Yeah. I'm curious, what other properties in Oakwood are historic landmarks on top of the district? Do we know of any right off?
Well, Archie and Valley Henderson, that was just
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the most recent.
Others.
There are a good number.
Yeah.
The Heck Pool House,
Right.
the Heck Andrews House.
Andrews isn't in Oakwood.
So the other Heck house,
Wynn and Pool.
the one that's next to the Heck pool house. Let's see, I can pull up the map.
Just to throw in, there's also the Tucker House, which is the city-owned property. And the Hunter House right next to it.
Yeah, I guess I'm asking because I'm kind of impartial. I didn't, a lot of these homes really predate me on the commission, so I don't know too much about the other homes' histories. But if this one kind of stands up to the same amount of additional significance, I'd be fine with moving forward with it. I thought it was a good application. I thought that the ongoing history, and I like the emphasis on how the home has been adaptive and its use over the years. And that was a strong point. I do like that it's still a residence as well, which is unique, it seems.
I think there are about 10.
Yeah, I agree. For those of you keeping score, it's the Heck Pool, Heck Lee, and Heck Wynn house. So it's roughly 10 properties right now out of what, about 600 or 700, Colette? Is that right? In the ballpark?
That sounds about right.
Okay, thanks for checking. Yeah, I'd be interested in moving this along and seeing what the rest of the commission has to say, if they want to move forward.
Anyone
I
else?
like the idea of designating a house, with the story about the fire and how they brought it back when it was called a total loss, but they brought it back in some pictures. I mean, it really does look like it's, it has historic fabric even on the interior. And I just think that us recognizing that and that those efforts can be made and the significance of the property will still exist is a good message from the commission.
Agreed.
Agreed. So would we be designating it on the basis of its architectural history or significance? And then it didn't seem like the original builder or owner had a whole lot. That was good context to have, but it didn't seem like that was really where the significance was. Any thoughts on that?
I think its significance for me is its place in Oakwood's history, being that it's one of the first houses in that area. That's what's significant to me, and the fact that it's had such a long and interesting history. The structure itself, how it's been added onto and burnt down and rebuilt, and all this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think how it adds to the neighborhood's history in total is important.
Yeah, I had no idea, even though I live in Oakwood, I had no idea that it was kind of one of the original ones or had been part of a big farm. That's sort of interesting and quite different from the rest of the houses in the neighborhood, which is essentially a subdivision of sorts through the years. So that's pretty cool.
Okay, so I think we're in agreement that we can move this forward. Can we move on, Colette? Is there anything else you want to say about this?
No, absolutely.
Okay. Let's move on to Jimmy's house. I'd like to hear from you, Colette, about what this entails. Like, what
Yeah. So,
for this?
okay. So similar to the designation process, following the same path as a designation, changing the name also will follow the same path because it requires changing the ordinance, updating all of those things. So every so often, I think Hillcrest was the last one. We include money in the budget each year for the commission to sponsor landmark applications. So I think in last year's budget, you sponsored Hillcrest's application. So in changing the name of this landmark, Tanya suggested that we bring it to you to ask if you would like to choose to sponsor this application. And that would just mean he wouldn't have to pay the application fee. To change the name, you would have to pay the full landmark application fee, which I don't remember, Aaron, is it $317, $316, somewhere in those?
Yeah, $317.
So I think that this was originally brought up maybe in January or February before chaos happened. But after interviewing children of the original property owner and builder, it has been revealed that the lady of the house had much more hand in the architectural design, but she is not reflected at all in the name of the house, as was common at the time of the initial designation. So this would be amending the property's name, the landmark report, to reflect her significance as well.
Did Jimmy request
To
this?
agree. I'm sorry, what was that?
Did Jimmy request this to be sponsored, or is this just us trying to be nice, or what?
Right. I believe it was Tanya suggesting that it be considered. He did not bring it up.
Okay. And you said we get one per year?
No. I think there's actually budget for 2 or 3, but it's not often that it gets used, I don't believe.
That was going to be my next question. So we probably won't use it this year if we don't use it on Jimmy.
The budget goes through the end of June.
Right.
So there is possibility that something else could come up.
What do you think the chances are? You said it hasn't happened often in the past, so I'm not.
Right. I think you have been fairly selective, I believe, about choosing what applications to sponsor. I think it's happened most often when nonprofits apply, like in the example of Hillcrest, it was a cemetery group. I can't even think of what one was sponsored before that. Maybe Oak Grove?
Yeah. I think it would be a good gesture, considering his contribution to the commission. So I'm in full support of it, especially since we don't sponsor that many, and if there's room in the budget for more than one, then that's fine. Anybody else have any thoughts?
I feel similarly. I think it'd be a nice gesture as well, especially coming at Tanya's recommendation, and we don't use this that much, I think this would be a good time to move on it.
I agree.
Nicole, do you have any thoughts? Did we lose her?
I think that she was on a
Can you hear me
call.
now?
Oh, there you go. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I do. I completely agree. I'm on my phone, so I'm double muted. It just,
Okay. Cool. Did you have anything else on your priority list, Colette, that you wanted to talk about?
Those were the three most pressing things.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to move on to the Weaver house. I visited the Weaver house yesterday with the City of Raleigh housing inspector and the property owners. Is everybody familiar with the Weaver house and where it is and everything? Anyone?
I'm not. I'm
You
not.
could screen share the location if you wanted to from iMaps.
Yeah, that'd be great. So it's on Lane Street. It's a Raleigh historic landmark. It was run into by a car a couple of years ago during a high-speed chase, and a third of
I
it
know
was
where it is
demolished.
exactly.
Yeah. So the owners want to demolish it. And they will likely be successful. I think it's scheduled for December demolition. And I visited it yesterday to see how much material could be salvaged from it. It's in pretty bad shape, obviously. There's not a whole lot of interesting stuff to salvage. There's two mantelpieces that could be saved, some doors maybe, but the doors really aren't all that interesting. Windows are the most interesting part of the house that I think should be saved. So I talked to Matthew Brown, and he recommended that one of his carpenter friends does a lot of architectural salvage work. So I'm going to hook him up with the owners of the property to see if he can go in there and save some stuff. But we did get a chance to walk around inside the house. There's homeless people living in there. There's no stairs to the upper portions of the house. But the Raleigh inspector had a ladder in his truck, so we climbed a ladder to the second floor, the rear portion, which interestingly enough doesn't connect to the second floor or the front portion. To get in the front upper portion, you have to climb a ladder onto the porch roof and go in through the window, which ended up being probably not even worth it because it was pretty uninteresting up there. But yeah, interesting experience overall. Hopefully some of this stuff can be saved in the house.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was in better shape than the code enforcement kind of thought originally, because they've recommended not entering whatsoever. But if people are living in the home and you're able to safely walk around, not making the case that it could be saved, but just interesting.
I think it probably could be saved, honestly.
Okay.
It's in pretty bad shape though. The upper floor is sagging because there's no support. It was probably pretty dangerous for us to go up there. Probably shouldn't have done it, but I couldn't help myself. Yeah.
Did you take any pictures or document
I did.
Documentation.
I took a few pictures, yeah. So I'm going to go back and try to salvage a couple of windows myself, probably in the next week or so.
When I was looking at it, the ones on the second floor on the east side and the back portion of the house seemed the most interesting to me.
Are you talking about those vertical panes with the wide top?
Yes. Yes.
Those actually are, there's duplicate windows like that on the front portion of the house as well, top and bottom floors. That bay window area, that has those windows as well. So I'm going to try to get those on the first floor, those three. Yeah. So hopefully part of that house can live on.
Remind me, the city has a budget for demolish, not for salvage. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's the way it was worded.
Just in terms of Ian potentially having to go up on a second floor roof to grab some windows doesn't seem like the way we would want to handle this if it's if salvage is going to be one of the requirements that the commission recommends for de-designation.
I think in this situation, if that was the recommendation that was made, I think the city would likely offer it to interested parties. They wouldn't be the one doing the salvaging.
Right. Pretty much what I'm doing. Okay. All right. Colette, can you speak a little bit about, we talked about landmarking properties that are associated with living people. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is this the conversation that we want to have today, or?
Sure, we can start talking about it. So it was just, I guess, a series of side comments that we had as staff. First, I guess, brought upon by the current conversation about Josephus Daniels, who was living at the time his house was designated, and then following up on Katie's suggestion from last month. There is no policy, but trying to determine, given how Josephus Daniels' history has transpired and, what has come about in the years following his death, whether it is a good idea to landmark the homes of people who are living or active in politics or, any of the above.
Gotcha, yeah.
I don't think we have any kind of recommendation. It was just a conversation that we were having that we thought was somewhat interesting and would be interesting to have with you guys.
And we don't have any other properties that are landmarked after living people, do we? Other than Daniels at the time?
Right. I think it's possible that at the time there may have been.
Yeah.
But currently, I don't think that there are any.
I think it's an interesting conversation to bring up. My first thought on it is that I think it's maybe a case by case situation, depending on, you know, what the person's activities are like, or how, I don't know if, how to exactly judge that, but I think if there was some additional, you know, additional significance about a property, not just related to the living owner of the property, that could be a basis for historic significance, of course, and other factors as well. So, but I think it's a good thing to evaluate for sure. And yeah, it's tough to determine historic significance of a living person, oftentimes because they're not history white yet, in a way. But yeah, those are my initial thoughts on it.
This was brought about by a property that I thought might have the potential to be a landmark, and it is 804 East Edenton Street. And it was the childhood home of William Bill Campbell, who was the first Black child to go to an all-white school, Murphy School, in September of 1960. Bill Campbell later went on to become the mayor of Atlanta. I think he served 2 terms, actually. The more I looked into the story of Bill Campbell and Raleigh desegregation, the more I got a really bad feeling about designating the property. Yeah, it doesn't feel right, especially with Bill Campbell's association, since he was, you know, he spent time in prison for fraud and everything after he was mayor. But I do believe that the property is historic in relation to him. Maybe not just yet. Maybe history needs to marinate on it a little while.
I think you're right. I think the house has architectural interest, significance in its own right. I think that the events that were forced upon him as a child are certainly significant. But you know, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a cool thing to know about, but landmarking it is, I don't think, is a good idea. Yeah. Anyone else have any thoughts? So maybe we just stay away from landmarking properties of living people. I'm going to move on. I have only one more thing on my list here. Nick wanted us to look into houses of the greatest generation. The FHA backed homes or neighborhoods that sprung up in Raleigh after World War II, like the Georgetown neighborhood. Colette, do you think that there's any, do you think this has enough weight to it? I don't know. It would seem odd to me to landmark some random 1940s house, even though I'm fond of the style. I live in one. It would, if I saw it as a regular person walking down the street in Georgetown, I would think that's weird. Why did they landmark that? What do you have thoughts on this?
I agree. When I first heard, or heard what he wanted, I felt immediately that we needed more direction, because that's a pretty broad statement. And I am trying to pull up. So if you have not explored, there is the State Historic Preservation Office has a web map that they update very regularly. I'm going to share it. And that shows all of the properties that have been surveyed, either officially through an architectural survey or through the environmental review process, through some undertaking happening through the state. I think a large portion of those properties likely have been surveyed in one way or another. All the symbolism here. So blue are properties. This is a National Register district. That's Roanoke Park. Yellow, these houses are what's considered block face surveyed, which means they haven't been officially surveyed in detail, but as part of, some survey they were doing, likely possibly Roanoke Park, these houses were not included in the National Register district, but were likely of an appropriate time frame, and they were given a inventory number. So they probably don't have a lot of information on these, but they're in the system, if you will. So, knowing that more direction on what exactly his interest was. There are certain areas of the city that have not seen any kind of survey or review, but a lot of this area is where they're doing pretty substantial tear down and rebuilding. So finding what's left would be interesting.
I think the tear downs may have been an inspiration for his.
Right.
Yeah.
I will add from an architectural history perspective that those types of houses, most typically you're going to see their significance as strength in numbers.
Yeah.
They are planned suburb communities, neighborhoods, smaller housing types, more urban in scale than, what you would modern connotations for a suburb are, but entirely planned workforce housing where you might see 5 to 6 different building types randomly, scattered throughout each of the lots. So to landmark one of these houses is a different conversation than identifying a potential district. But there's also a philosophical conversation going on in the preservation community right now about the significance of the vernacular versus, when you think of a landmarked property, it's big, it's beautiful, it's important, it's exceptional, I guess is the word I'm looking for, rather than the standard of the time, and questions about, is that the appropriate way to approach preservation in the first place, because most people are not living their lives in those buildings. But certainly more direction on what the chair hopes to accomplish would be useful to have.
Well, and I also thought by adding in the FHA component, that brings in a discussion about, redlining. Are we looking at the neighborhoods that received FHA loans and were originally, segregated? They had requirements for purchasing. And I've seen through some online comments, there are a number of people doing research on the neighborhoods that had restrictions and their construction, which, is an interesting fact. But is that the neighborhood we want to focus on and preserve?
That was my concern as well, and I think I voiced that concern in my email reply, without saying it directly. But yeah, I don't really know. Do you want to get further clarification from Nick before we potentially do something about this, or should we table it, or what?
It's up to you guys. I think that clarification may help narrow the scope. But there are a lot of other things that you're working on. So if you want to focus on those and table that, that is also fine.
I'd like to get some clarification just so we know a little more context about what he might be requesting. I think if there is a good specific opportunity to preserve one of these properties, then we might want to look into it further. But I think it's just kind of an umbrella blanket question. I think we need a little more information before deciding whether or not to table it or if we want to move forward on anything.
Okay, thanks, Katie. I don't have anything else. Colette, do you have anything else? Aaron?
I do not, but our guest, Greg Adams, is present. So I don't know if you want to have him introduce himself, talk about his interest.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Greg, can you hear me? Can you unmute? He's unmuted. Oh, he is checking settings.
Just what I was about to say. If there's headphones involved, it's always complicated.
Looks like Greg says, hey everyone, my mic is not cooperating.
Colette, you could call him in if you cared to try.
Let's see.
He's putting stuff in the chat if somebody wants to read it, his messages.
Sounds like you nominated yourself, Caleb.
All right. Hi, everyone. My mic is not cooperating. I'm Greg Adams and am a structural engineer here in Raleigh. I'm interested in helping identify and preserve our city's history. Exclamation point. And Nicole says, I use my phone and the video combo. That's how she does this.
So Colette, I'm not sure what context we provided for Greg attending the meeting. He is someone who's reached out to the city and RHDC with interest in serving, potentially as a public volunteer on the committee. So I think he was able to make community awareness yesterday. He's here to see what research is all about today, and hopefully we'll be able to get involved and dig in with us.
That's great. Thank you for your interest, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. My dad is a structural engineer as well, so I have much respect for your work.
I bet he could add something to our Weaver House conversation.
Good point.
True that.
Anybody have anything else?
I do not have anything.
Okay.
And Mr. Adams says he is looking forward to it. That's his other chat.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good one.
Thank you.